CNN's Elena Treen is with us now. Quite the list of demands here, Elena.
Yeah, and I would put it this way, too. I mean, remember, the House Oversight Chairman, James Comer, had subpoenaed her to testify. And what we're getting now from her lawyers, this is what they had sent to the Oversight Committee. They essentially said that initially that they had decided to invoke her Fifth Amendment rights, of course, saying that she wouldn't want to comply or answer their questions. But then they changed their minds, they said, and are now saying that she will accept this subpoena, comply with the subpoena on many different conditions. I'm just going to walk through some of those for you, Brianna. So one of them is a grant of formal immunity. I think that's, of course, the top line here, that what they're really looking for in exchange for any sort of transparency or answers from Epstein's accomplice. They also had that the interview can't happen at the correctional facility where she's currently serving out her sentence. They went on to say that to prepare adequately for any congressional deposition and to ensure the accuracy and fairness, they would require the committee's questions in advance. Again, something that the committee does not normally, if ever, do. And then it went on to say that the interview should only be scheduled after the resolution of her case pending before the Supreme Court, where she's asking for her conviction to be overturned. Now, we did already get a response from the Oversight Committee here in the House, a spokeswoman person for them saying that the Oversight Committee will respond to Ms. Maxwell's attorney soon, but it will not consider granting congressional immunity for her testimony. Brianna, we've now heard this a lot from many different Republicans on Capitol Hill, but also Democrats as well, that they do not want to consider immunity in order to get answers from Ghislaine Maxwell. And so it's still very much unclear where this would go from here. What was also interesting, though, in this letter from Maxwell's attorneys to the House Oversight Committee, they also said that the demands could not be met. She would have no choice but to invoke her Fifth Amendment right. But then they said, kind of ending it with an appeal to President Donald Trump for clemency. They said that if Ms. Maxwell were to receive clemency, she would be willing and eager to testify openly and honestly in public. All to say, look, there's been a lot of attention, of course, on what Ghislaine Maxwell knows as this Epstein case continues to receive so much attention. We know that the Deputy Attorney General, Todd Blanche, interviewed her over 2 days last week. We still have gotten no insight into what exactly the Justice Department might have gleaned from those interviews, but it's very key or clear that she is key to hopefully getting some more answers here. But a lot of people nervous about what it actually means to try and make any sort of deal or give any sort of concessions in order for her testimony, Brianna.
Yeah, and indicted for perjury in the past, we should note as well. Right. Elena Treen, thank you so much for the very latest there. We're joined by Ankush Kardori, a former federal prosecutor. Okay, first, let's start with that last bit of what Maxwell's lawyer is talking about. What issues of at least perceived funny business does this raise when you have Maxwell's lawyer talking about how, oh, she'll testify fully if there's clemency, as the president is not ruling out pardoning her?
Yeah, well, it looks like her lawyer is proceeding somewhat strategically and trying to facilitate a pardon. I have to say to the folks in Congress who helped to create this is what happens when you give a criminal and all-around garbage human being leverage over you. They start creating lists of demands that make you look foolish if you accede to them. They should never have gone down this path. The Justice Department should not be working with her. She has no credibility. She's in prison for 20 years on heinous charges, and she has a whole host of incentives to lie or shade the truth. If I were still in government, I would not trust this woman, and I would not touch her with a 10-foot pole. Okay,
so let's talk about that, because a lot of that seems to be missing sometimes from the conversation. There are a lot of details in this case, right? It is complicated, but there is no Jeffrey Epstein operation without Ghislaine Maxwell not just normalizing the situation for the girls who were victimized, but recruiting them as well. So you call her a garbage human being. Why?
Because what she did was heinous and awful, and she traumatized many young women, and they're going to live with that trauma for the rest of their lives. And one of the particularly offensive elements of the Justice Department entertaining this, Republicans in Congress entertaining this, is that she has victims, and those victims have to watch all of this unfold and have to watch them pretending like this woman has some credibility and potentially some information that may be valuable, despite all appearances and despite the fact that she has never once cooperated with the government up until this time. She was charged with 2 different counts of perjury that fortunately for her were dropped after a sex trafficking conviction, and she contested her guilt at the trial. The government had to go to trial to prove it. She had victims of her own who are testifying there too. So the fact that her victims are being put through this now sort of re-emerging trauma on a daily basis is good enough reason to stop this in its tracks immediately.
So one of these stipulations that she's making is she's been subpoenaed by Congress for, and that she would, one of the stipulations for testimony is that it would be only after the resolution of her Supreme Court petition and her forthcoming habeas petition. Let's be clear about what she's asking the Supreme Court to do. She's asking them to see it the way she wants to see it, which is that she believes she should be protected by that very controversial deal that Jeffrey Epstein brokered in 2008. How do you think the Supreme Court is going to see it?
Well, I hope that they turn that effort away. This has been resolved previously by the lower courts, and she is really not an appealing figure to bend over and to provide any sort of accommodations to. It is quite striking how she has gone within a matter of weeks to being basically a pariah, and rightly so, to someone that the Justice Department and Republicans in Congress are treating like a potentially credible source of information. I am not surprised at all that she's come up with a long list of demands and that her lawyer has supplemented them. Honestly, her lawyer is probably doing the right thing, but trying to exploit the vulnerabilities of both the president and Republicans in Congress.
Visited Jeffrey Epstein's private island. Listen.
I never had the privilege of going to his island, and I did turn it down, but a lot of people in Palm Beach were invited to his island. In one of my very good moments, I turned it down. I didn't want to go to his island.
Those comments come as attorneys for the longtime Epstein accomplice, Ghislaine Maxwell, are expected to make their final pitch to the U.S. Supreme Court as they look to try to overturn her conviction. She's currently serving 20 years in prison. Let's discuss with CNN's senior legal analyst and former state and federal prosecutor, Elie Honig. Elie, thanks for joining us. Walk us through where things stand with Maxwell's expected Supreme Court appeal.
So, Wolf, back in 2008, when Jeffrey Epstein was prosecuted by Justice Department prosecutors in the Southern District of Florida, he was given an outrageously lenient plea deal. And in addition to all the sentencing benefits that Jeffrey Epstein was given, there was a really unusual provision in that deal, which said that none of Jeffrey Epstein's co-conspirators will be prosecuted in that district. Now, fast forward to 2020, Ghislaine Maxwell gets indicted in the Southern District of New York, a different part of the Justice Department. And Maxwell has argued both at the trial court and the Court of Appeals that that deal DOJ made back in 2008 benefits her. It says she can't be prosecuted if DOJ says she's one of the co-conspirators. However, DOJ's position up until now, including now, has been that that deal was only binding on the prosecutors in Florida, not on prosecutors in New York, and that that kind of deal, releasing co-conspirators, is basically invalid because it's so much against public interest. So judges have ruled against Maxwell at the trial court level and at the Federal Court of Appeals level, and now Maxwell is down to her last hope, which is trying to get the U.S. Supreme Court to take up this issue.
So what do you think? How much of a hope does she have?
So the Supreme Court statistically takes only a very small proportion of all cases brought to it, under 10%, usually under 5%, usually in the range of 2 or 3% recently. On the one hand, Wolf, there have been different interpretations of this issue in different circuits around the country, which is usually a factor that makes it more likely the Supreme Court will take the case. On the other hand, though, the Supreme Court was brought this same exact issue in a separate case a few years ago and declined to hear it then. So maybe they've had a change of heart. So I would say overall it is unlikely but not impossible that the Supreme Court takes this case.
If this appeal fails, Elie, what other legal avenues could Maxwell's team pursue?
So it's clear that Ghislaine Maxwell now is making a play for some sort of leniency. She got a 20-year sentence. She's about 5 years into that sentence, and she's in her mid-60s. The other way she could get relief, or there's really two main ways. One is to hope for a pardon or a commutation, and we've seen various comments made by the president refusing to rule that out, saying he hasn't thought about it. But the other one is Maxwell can try to convince DOJ prosecutors, and this may be what's part of behind the meeting that she had last week. She can try to convince the DOJ to write a letter, what we call a Rule 35 letter, to a court saying, yes, she's already been convicted and sentenced. However, she's been cooperative. Her cooperation was helpful. And therefore, Judge, we ask you to resentence her to something lower. Now, DOJ should be very careful about when they write those letters, especially in a case like this. But it is theoretically and procedurally possible.
As you know, Ellie, this morning, President Trump once again spoke about whether he could pardon Ghislaine Maxwell. I want you to listen to what he said specifically. Listen to this.
Well, I'm allowed to give her a pardon, but nobody's approached me with it. Nobody's asked me about it. It's in the news about that aspect of it, but right now it would be inappropriate to talk about it.
So what stands out to you about those comments from Trump?
I don't know, Wolf. This boggles my mind. It's the same response he's been giving. Will you consider a pardon for a convicted child sex trafficker? I mean, the easiest thing to say is just no, of course not. What president wouldn't say that? And the fact that Trump keeps saying he has the power, and by the way, he's right.
It really looks like Maxwell has trapped Republicans. Not just Trump, but others as well, because no matter what, they're kind of stuck. Because people see the scheme coming, and a lot of MAGA-adjacent influencers and whatnot see it too. This isn't a scenario where they're all either willingly blind or just too dumb to understand, like we've seen in the past, where it's obvious the scheme Trump and the GOP is pulling, and they just don't get it. Like, we could explain it to them. You could explain it to, say, some of your family that's MAGA, and they just don't or won't get it. Yet with here, they understand it. They understand that either way, Trump loses. Because if, for example, Maxwell does testify truthfully, she will implicate Trump in the list. She will 100%. Now, what exactly he did in the list, we don't know, but she will implicate him. They were too close. And Trump himself said that this was Epstein's devious acts were not the reason he had a falling out with Epstein. As he said just in the last little bit, the reason they had a falling out was over business, over poaching employees and stuff. And, that's pretty standard stuff. Sometimes, business partners or friends, they fall over business. That's actually pretty typical. But then you have to ask yourself, with Jeffrey Epstein, that was the reason your friendship ended? That? And not any of the other things? Really? And so I think she will implicate him. But if she doesn't implicate him, people already smell the stink. They already know the scandal is coming. People think that what's happening right now is the GOP is trying to use her to give cover to Trump. And so either way Trump loses. If it's clearly part of the scheme, she can get her immunity or pardon, whatever, but people won't believe that she was honest. They just won't believe it. And if she goes out and does drop the bombshell on everybody, as she could, I think she has the ability to do so, well, then that's even more doom-filled. So Donald and the GOP, you won't win with Ghislaine.